Hello. So this video is going to be a performance review of Nora and Delia Ephron's Love, Loss, and What I Wore, performed at the Gamble Mill or in affiliation with Zapkin Theater Company, and directed by Priscilla McFerrin. So the play is an adaptation of Eileen Beckerman's book, which I think has the same title, and it is primarily interested in how women relate to their past, their experiences through memories of clothing. So this is really quite an interesting premise for a couple of reasons. One is that One is that it deals with material culture, which is a really important component of understanding how people actually live our lives, right? So material culture is basically all the stuff that we have within a particular society. So that includes things like clothing, that will include technology like smartphones, that will include glasses cases, that will include books, the physical objects of books, not as much the ideas within the books or the artistic expression within the books. So all of the stuff that we have within a society, and the study of material culture tells us a lot about how people exist within that society, what sort of values that society holds, how that society organizes itself and understands itself, etc., etc. This is really central to disciplines like archaeology, for instance, right? Where you, as an archaeologist, may look for pottery shards. And those pottery shards tell you a lot about the culture, the kind of food they were consuming, how they were preparing it, all these things. Love, Loss, and What I Wore focuses on women's clothing. The other reason that that's particularly interesting is that it's women's clothing specifically. And in U.S. society, and this is a play about American women, in U.S. society, as in many other societies, women are disproportionately judged based on their appearances, based on what they wear, based on how they carry themselves, etc., etc. And those anxieties shape a lot of the play, right? Characters experience anxieties about their body size, the size of their stomachs, the size of their breasts, the size of their butts, the size of their thighs, the size of whatever it is. They experience anxiety about how they will be perceived if they wear certain things. And a lot of that ends up coming in the voices of their mothers. There's one character who talks about having, going to Berkeley and wearing these boots, these sort of over-the-knee boots with these very short skirts, and feeling very powerful and mysterious and interesting for that. But then after experiencing sexual violence, the character gives up the short skirts because the meaning of them for her has changed. They no longer feel liberatory and freeing and independent and mysterious and whatever it is. They come to feel for this character like an invitation to danger. And so that element of sort of victim blaming with sexual violence is incorporated in here. But at the same time, I don't want to make this seem like it's a tragedy, because it's not. It's an extremely funny play with tragic moments. There are also moments of great joy associated with clothing. Like, there's one character who talks about having no fashion sense, just no no idea what goes together, not even any concern with clothing. Clothing is not something that speaks to her, with one exception, which is this memory of a bathrobe that her mother had. And the robe itself is not an especially glamorous or interesting fashion piece, but it has those associations. And there's a number of stories of clothing being liberatory, of freeing people from the sense that their body doesn't look right or isn't right or something like this. That a particular piece of clothing or a different size of clothing or whatever it is change the way they view themselves as a person. And so it is this very positive play overall. It is about understanding oneself through material culture within a patriarchal and sexist society that very much imposes critical beauty standards on women, often to the psychological detriment of women, right? Often women experience negative psychological impacts, decreased self-esteem, etc., etc. The substantial problems with eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, etc., etc., most commonly documented in young women and girls, is directly connected to this, right? This sense of not physically being the right body shape. And clothing, of course, is connected to that. Because we wear clothes on our bodies, and so they are a reflection of ourselves and the way that we want to be perceived in the world. And so in this sense, this focus on how memory is tied to clothing is a really, really interesting one. So, the Gamble Mill Sock and Buskin production, directed by Priscilla McFerrin, who I've performed with before, she's amazing, was excellent. It was a staged reading, and so this was not a sort of full performance, completely staged and lines memorized and whatnot. It was a staged reading, which is, for anybody not familiar with that, basically the actors read from the scripts, but they also bring the characters to life in the course of doing that. And so it's somewhere between reading aloud and a full performance. And it's actually kind of a difficult thing to do, because you wouldn't necessarily think that if you haven't experienced it. But as an actor, one of the things that you want to do is to be able to, use gesture, say the lines naturally. But when you're trying to perform a character and bring them to life, and you're reading from a script that you have to hold and refer back to, that kind of limits your ability to actually bring that character to life. And the cast did an excellent job with this. So there's no specific characters that people played, because there was a wide range of stories of characters over the course of the play. We have, I guess this is in the cast list here is in alphabetical order. Christine Allen, who I've directed before, and she's absolutely incredible. Christy Brandstetter, who I've seen in a number of things. Jackie Giannico, who I've seen, I think, just in one thing, maybe, but she's very, very good as well. Alexa Krebs, who I don't know if I've seen her in anything, but I feel like I may have. But she was very good. And Carrie Marcinkiewicz, who I'm reasonably certain I've seen in other things, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. So one of the things that was interesting is you had kind of a disproportionate balance of characters in a way, and that's sort of a necessary outcome of this performance. So people like Christy, Jackie, Alexa played a lot of characters, often fairly small portions of characters, and they sort of cycled through scenes very quickly. Whereas Chris, for instance, played Christine Allen. Chris played, it seemed like a smaller number of characters, but often those characters had more extended monologue scenes. So there was a weird balance. Actually, Christy Brandstetter did have one recurring character, Gigi, who I think we had 6 parts to Gigi's story, something like that. So it developed over 6 different scenes. So you did have that recurring character where she could develop that character over and over again. But Chris was in less of the short, more interactive bits and had more monologues. Whereas many of the other actors had these shorter portions, but they had a larger number of them. So that was kind of an interesting distribution. And again, I think that kind of has to happen to give everyone more or less an equal share of the performance. But one of the things that means is the acting styles that they needed to use were different. So Chris, for instance, had this fairly long, really hilarious monologue about hating purses, just vicious to the purse as an institution. And it was a much long, I think that was probably, in terms of number of words and amount of time, that was probably the longest single portion of the play. And Chris really got to develop that character with specific gestures, mannerisms, ways of speaking, etc., etc. And because it was an extended portion, and really, really, really well done, because it was an extended portion, that character could be developed and a lot of work could be put into making that person come alive. Whereas if you were Jackie or Alexa or Carrie, who had a bunch of smaller parts spread out and had different characters for them, the challenge then becomes to bring something unique to each of those characters, right? To make each of those characters with their small, relatively small number of lines and amount of stage time, to make them unique and interesting. And that's a different kind of acting challenge, right? Because it's more common, I think, for actors to develop a character through rehearsals and through that character having a lot of dialogue, a lot of lines that you can get a sense for them. Whereas when you're doing a bunch of small pieces, you have to really sort of bring something new to each of those pieces. And that means you have to come up with a bunch of different stuff. If you have 10 different characters that you're playing, you have to create 10 different characters with unique mannerisms, voices, styles, etc., etc. And so having both of those elements within this performance, those more extended monologues and those shorter, more sort of kaleidoscopic type performances, was really interesting. And the cast did an amazing job balancing these things. Priscilla did an amazing job of facilitating them balancing these things. And then the other person that was involved in the show was Joe Brandstetter, who is listed as stage manager / production assistant. And Joe, actually, I worked with Joe when I directed The Mousetrap. I think she was our costume designer, I want to say. I can't remember if it was costumes or props. that Joe did, but I think it was costumes. Anyway, so Joe played this sort of supporting on-stage role of distributing props for the few scenes in which characters used props, and shifting, because on the far side from where I was sitting, they had drawings of the various pieces of clothing that are discussed in the play. And these drawings were suspended on clothes hangers, and whenever they switched to discussion of a new garment, they'd take the clothes hanger off, hand it to Joe, and Joe would put it on the back. So it was very well organized visually in this sense to, again, you get this balance between this is a reading, but also this is staged in some way. It's not a full staging, but you've got props, you've got costumes, you've got mannerisms, etc., etc. You've got on the stage action that makes this very much an effective show. And it was, again, really, really well done. I don't remember if I mentioned this, but this is an important thing to note. This was a charity performance to raise money for Out of the Cold. So excellent performance for an excellent cause.